There was a time at least the church felt that if we really spread the gospel to all the world, one day all the world will become Christian. After 2000 years, many of the religious traditions continue to exist. And even those countries that have been previously Christian are now becoming multi-faith. Most of the Christians are beginning to rethink the way we relate to people of the faith tradition. This is going to be the subject for this class and the next class.
It seems like there is no reason for me to be called Christian anymore.
So you have to decide why you are a Christian. Are you a Christian because other religions are not true? Or is there a reason why you are a Christian? Now, people ask me when I give interfaith dialogue, if you are so impressed with Hinduism and Buddhism and all that, why is that you are a Christian? I say, I am a Christian because the life and teachings of Jesus Christ and what He tells us about who God is, what God demands of us, is challengingly relevant to my life. And I find it profoundly meaningful. And therefore I am a Christian. In Peter we have the statement, be prepared to give an account of the hope that is in you.
Professor,
Yeah.
I grew up from a very conservative family. Like I grew up from little. We take Bible as the Word of God, and it's very hard for me to accept, to understand all this. I grew up in Indonesia. There's a lot of Hindu temple, mosque and all that. I will never step into their temple because they tell me, look, those are a lot of those are devil place. You shouldn't go there.
I was the same place. I was also brought in a very conservative background. I had gone many times to the altar to give my heart to Jesus Christ. I have no problem with different ways of understanding the faith. All of us are at a particular point in our spiritual journey, and nobody is right or wrong, or advanced or backwards. It's just that our different experiences opens us to different ways of looking at this question. I'm a third generation Christian from Sri Lanka. We lived in a small seaside town in Sri Lanka, and our immediate neighbors were all Hindus. And we had an extremely devout Hindu family next door to us. And in Sri Lanka, as in India, the neighbors always are in one another's homes. And when we had evening prayers, their children would sit with us. As I grew up and I went to mission school, and when I was told that Hindus do not believe in God as we believe, etc., I really rebelled within myself, because here I had the experience of my Hindu neighbor as a deeply devout people, and whose puja and whose songs to God were so genuine, and they were able to incorporate us and to have us as part of that community, and also so open enough to allow their children to be at our evening prayers at home. I just could not accept the fact that God in some sense would accept me as a Christian and would reject our Hindu neighbors. Later I gave it as a title for one of my books. I said, if there's a place, heaven, I would not want to be there where my neighbors were not. I just simply could not accept that because these people did not believe the way we did, they were in some way condemned or outside God's mercy and love. And has continued to really shape the way that I have thought about interfaith relations for much of my ministry. I had as my pastor one of the great ecumenists of our time, D.T. Niles, one of the first presidents of the World Council of Churches. He confirmed me and ordained me, and because of his very strong biblical preaching and faith that I decided to go into the ministry, and also became so deeply involved in the ecumenical movement. Second person who really influenced my life was Lin A. De Silva. He was a fellow Methodist minister, but he was one of those people who felt that after the colonial period, we need to really rethink our relationship with the Buddhists, we Christians. Sri Lanka had been a Portuguese colony, then a Dutch colony, then a British colony. So the Buddhists and Hindus have suffered during that time and had a rather negative approach to Christianity. Lini Silva felt that we need to rethink our relationship with the Buddhists and we need to rebuild it on a basis of dialogue. When I was a young minister, was introduced into interfaith dialogue work, sitting down with Buddhists as Christians or with Hindus and trying to promote understanding. So that was a big impact on me. I was sent as a youth advisor to the 5th Assembly of the World Council of Churches in Nairobi, where the dialogue program came under a lot of pressure. And I was one of the young fellows, but got up and spoke very strongly about it. That was a very formative moment for me, about 3,000 people, and suddenly I was up there trying to defend a new way of life with our neighbors of other faith traditions. That led me to finally work with the World Council of Churches. I was invited in 1981 to become the director of the World Council of Churches Interfaith program, and I worked there for 12 years. I was going many parts of the world to try to convince the Christians that we are in a new situation and that we need to rethink our faith for religious plurality, and that interfaith dialogue is something consistent with our biblical faith. So how you can be both to be committed and be open? Working with the World Council of Churches. Whenever I go to Africa, meeting with our member churches, but also try to see the reality of the churches in that area. I was struck by the way in which not only the African churches were growing in their numbers, but also were finding their own selfhood, as it were. Then I, for the first time, realized that we are in a different situation. We have churches that have indigenized themselves, so that it is still the Anglican Church or the Presbyterian Church or Methodist Church, but they have incorporated cultural elements and there is a new vibrancy. Real, true African Christianity expressing itself in African culture, and especially when you meet with the African independent churches, churches that are originated from Africa itself.
A person cannot see God without seeing God through his own culture. Now, if Jesus is preached in Africa, he must live in African culture. He has to dance with me. He has to sing with me. He has to drum with me for me to see God.
So the whole future of Christianity, it became a new question for me. Of course, it will take 100 years before we know how this is going to shake out. I was very lucky that it was to Drew that I came, because it is a very progressive seminary in which there is openness to all kinds of ways of thinking about the Christian faith and even teaching that. And secondly, there is a cultural plurality in the faculty and the confessional plurality in the faculty. The student community is also culturally diverse. Many of the others who are in the faculty from Africa and Latin America feel that there is an enormous openness to bring the richness of our different traditions and cultures into the curriculum.
Kanisa litajengwa means, who will build the church now? And we answer, yo, yes.
We meet in different places, in different towns, villages, countries. We wear different clothing and have different customs.
But some believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees stood up and said, "It is necessary for them to be circumcised," and ordered to keep the law of Moses. The apostles and the elders met together to consider this matter. After there had been much debate, Peter stood up and said to them, "My brothers, you know that in the early days God made a choice among you, that I should be the one through whom the Gentiles would hear the message of the good news and become believers. And God, who knows the human heart, testified to them by giving them the Holy Spirit, just as he did to us. And in cleansing their hearts by faith, he made no distinction between them and us. Now, therefore, why are you putting God to the test by placing on the neck of the disciples a yoke that neither our ancestors nor we have been able to bear?"
This is the biggest challenge of crossing barriers that the church has ever felt. But to continue as a Jewish community, or to open the gates and to allow a larger community to become part of this group. The missionaries who went into Africa, Asia and Latin America in the early stages were felt with the same challenge. Do they have enough faith that this Christian faith can make sense in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, in their own terms, in their own culture, in the way that they can perceive it? Dr. D.T. Niles has an interesting example of what they did and what they did not do. When you bring the gospel to another nation, you have to bring it in your own culture. You have no choice. You have to bring it in a culture. He says it is like a pot plant. You bring a plant in the pot. When you go to another country, what you had to do was to break the pot and plant that gospel so that it will draw nourishment from the soil of that country. But some of them planted it with the pot. The capacity, faith, the confidence in the part of the gospel has to do with how much we are prepared to let go of the gospel. The sure and certain hope that in every situation, everywhere, what God has done in Jesus Christ can make sense and become real in the life of people in any part of the world. Sometimes it means theological crossing of barriers. You remember Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman? She had a great doubt whether it is at all possible to worship God in this mountain when Zion is the city of God. Zion is a place where God resides. And Jesus does theology on his feet. He crossed the theological barrier. He says, "I tell you, woman, not in this mountain or in that mountain, but everyone who worships God in spirit and in truth will be accepted by him."
Christ has broken down the wall. Christ has broken down the wall. Let us join our hearts as one. Christ has broken down the wall.
There was one thing that was lacking when I came here. There was no courses on world religions or on religious pluralism or questions of interfaith dialogue. Therefore, I found that one of my major contributions to Drew would be to really have a very strong program here on world religions, religious pluralism, interfaith dialogue, and theology of religions. All the religions are different from one another. But the only common thing we are saying is that all these religious traditions are oriented towards one reality, but from different angles and different cultures and different philosophies, etc. They have a common concern for liberation, salvation, moksha, sunyata, whatever you call it. I am one of the people who are leading yet another school of thought in the theology of religions, and I am saying, if we sincerely believe that everybody can be saved only through Jesus Christ, then we have to be exclusivist. We can't be pluralist. So that's the problem that you both are raising. It's a very good question. Therefore, you can also ask the question in another way. Was the church right in insisting and interpreting Jesus in this way? Or can we reinterpret Christ and his significance in new ways for a pluralistic world? What I have done in my recent book is to study this problem of the uniqueness and finality of Christ and salvation only through Jesus Christ, and study it historically and to see how it came about. Because why do we have this understanding of God, of Christology? Because we have a doctrine of original sin. Jesus had to die in order to take away the sin. Then you go back and ask, is the original sin the right understanding of human anthropology? The Genesis 3 story is in Judaism, Islam and Christianity. In Judaism, it is not original sin, not a fall. In Islam, there is not original sin, not fall. In Christianity, initially it is not like that. And by the time Augustine came around, doctrine of original sin came. So you ask, did we exaggerate the problem of sin in the church? So, in order to have a pluralistic position, to respect other religious tradition, you must rethink your Christian theology. Maybe that we have to give up some of the Christological affirmations we have made today. Now, it's a very radical thing to say, and it will create a lot of controversies, but the idea is to start a discussion. Yeah. One of the professors put this nicely, that most of the students who pass out of Drew, when they go back to the churches, they have one of two options. Either they become heretics or hypocrites. In my classes, I always say how to mediate this kind of ideas to the congregations. And I talk about the importance of a teaching ministry. Most of them try to do things with a preaching ministry. And I say, it is not a good idea to bring controversial subjects into preaching, because people can't challenge you, people cannot ask questions. And secondly, you should never say any of these things as though this is the truth. You have come from the seminary, you know better than the congregation, And you must say that, there have been different ways of thinking, some people think like that, and etc. And if somebody disagrees, say it's perfectly all right. That is also one possible position. So that they must know that you are respecting, everybody is respected. When you say Bible says, it is a very big statement. John 14:6 says, not the whole Bible. We must see whether that verse is consistent with overall teachings of Jesus. In the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus is a normal teacher. He says, look at the lilies of the field, etc. And but in St. John's Gospel, he is like a philosopher. And the bread that came down from heaven, anyone who eats his bread. But in Synoptic Gospel, he tells stories and parables and things like that. Two different Jesuses. So this doesn't mean that John is wrong. But John, writing 100 years after Jesus' life, is writing a theological account with Jesus' life as a basis.